From tariff power to discounting, we're diving deep into the steel market. Soft construction and iffy auto demand are colliding with rising capacity. Is this steel slump just a phase, or is it the new normal? Stay tuned as we explore what flips the script on this industry. You won't want to miss the insights that could change everything.
So just shifting gears because I've been dying to talk about steel demand and commodities in general because it is a passion. But when you look at the different pieces and trying to kind of sniff out, is the economy slowing? Is it growing? People will always start talking about steel demand. Where is steel capacity? Where is steel demand? Because steel is obviously going to be pivotal to a lot of things. We've built out some of our mini mills or those electric arc furnaces where you take scrap metal and turn it into new metal. Now, that can be used for most things, not all things, which is why we're always going to have blast furnaces where you're going to make brand new steel from your typical process. So when you start looking at, some of the things that you're thinking, when you look at demand being lower, but yet tariffs should be helping by keeping some of that steel off the coast, what are you kind of seeing, or what is your inclination when you see this type of demand struggle?
Yeah, so Mark, I think that's the key point, right? What's happening with tariffs. And one of the reasons why, you know, when President Trump announced tariffs, right? Every macro person, every economist on Twitter or X, they went hyperbolic. They started whining and crying. They went crazy. Oh no, he's going to ruin the economy. And the reason why I was much less reactive and much less concerned about it is because people adjust, right? If you start to block foreign suppliers, you get an increase in domestic supply. Well, guess what? That's exactly what we had here. Domestic steel mills have been ramping up their output, and underlying steel demand isn't growing as fast. And, we can have a debate about how good the economy is, but I've been saying for years that our GDP numbers have been faked. And the reason they're faked is because government spending, whether it's productive or not, and most of it is not productive, adds to GDP, right? So they throw money at something and say, hey, look, we've created GDP. No, they haven't. They've just spent money and added to the debt, but they get to add it to GDP. They haven't really created anything productive. So what's happened here is domestic steel mills have ramped up output. They've increased capacity. Time-sensitive orders are getting filled. Steelmakers have found themselves cutting prices to chase sales. Hey, Mark, do you remember just a few weeks ago when President Trump was talking about steel tariffs and all the auto executives who started crying and screaming and saying, oh no, cars,
Panicking.
right? Yeah, cars aren't going
Panic.
to be, right? Every car is going to cost 7,000 more, 10,000 more. Nobody's going to be able to afford cars. You remember all of the
Oh yeah.
craziness? Yeah. Yeah. Well, guess what? They were wrong about that. We actually have lower steel prices. So again, the reason that these economists are consistently wrong is because they do static analysis, right? They say, well, if we increase prices, you'll lose demand and it'll all fall apart and we'll all just pay more. But the dynamic analysis is, wait a minute, if foreign supply is more expensive, we'll get more domestic supply. And as people shift, right, we just end up with more domestic supply. And it's one of the key reasons why, despite the fact that in US history, we have had multiple rounds of tariff expansions, it often doesn't lead to widespread economic disasters, right? Or at least nothing trackable. And the guy who did, I think, really great work on this, we've talked about it before, Anthony Pompliano, did some really interesting work. He took a look at the history and found a whole bunch of examples of where the US had raised tariffs, but prices didn't go up. And the reason he found was more domestic supply. That's exactly what's happening here. Surprisingly, the automakers are not complaining this time around, or at least not that I've seen.
So in the DKI five things, you mentioned residential construction, which increased in 2024, and now we actually have a near record amount of new homes for sale, topping out where we were in 2008, and which again is gonna kind of show you where that demand is. But even more than that is also commercial real estate. And if you look at the commercial real estate market, nobody's building new commercial real estate. I mean, you have things that are selling at fire sale prices. So there's really no huge absorption of this capacity until we start seeing some of the bigger build outs from Facebook, Meta, Google, Amazon, when you start looking at these data centers. And it's great that you brought up cars, because one of the biggest things is, where EV is going to come in? And the reason why electric vehicles matter so much is because weight is such a huge concern, because the more weight, the less distance, the more wear and tear, because you want to keep that as light as possible. So you have more plastics, more aluminum. So when you start looking at the slowdown in demand, I think Mercedes shuttered 4 of their 5 EV production for the month of September. They're even considering, do they even want to have some of these lines going forward? Because we've essentially capped out at about 9.7% demand for EVs. So then you have this reversion back to people want SUVs, they want pickup trucks. So that is going to be a bit more steel when you think about the frames and the like, which could provide some semblance. But realistically, as we always joke about in commodities, the cure for high prices are high prices. And because you're going to bring back more production, you're going to slow down some of that demand. And then as the prices come down, you find what we like to call a clearing price, a price in which, I can't turn that down. I have to buy here, even if I store it, because I can't, this is something that I may not get for the next 24 months. So when you start looking at some of the build outs that are coming, because we are getting that onshoring, we are getting some of these mega builds. When you look at the deals that have recently been signed by Google, Meta on the manufacturing AI front, that's when you can start to see some of this absorption. But until then, it's going to be difficult, and maybe at this point you're just going to see a more overhang, especially as China starts to dump some of their steel into the market, because they're also looking at a huge supply glut that they're going to have to do something with.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you talk about when a price hits a certain level, you have to store it. Just last week, we were talking about futures contracts and explaining it, and I talked about the hilarious example, and every young trader gets schooled on this, where, somebody bought futures contracts. They got excited because they were in the money, oh, good, I made a lot of money. But they forgot that commodities futures deal with actual physical goods. They forgot to sell the contract, and, some trader on a floor would get a phone call saying, hey, where do you want this enormous quantity of wheat delivered or corn delivered? And they're like, wait, what? It didn't occur to them that they weren't trading, right? They weren't trading numbers on a screen. They were trading an actual thing. You had to take delivery. And,
Yep.
I remember back in 2020 when oil prices went below 0,
Mm-hmm.
right? And,
Oh, yeah.
because everybody was producing, and all these governments shut down their economies and told everybody, don't go to work, you can't go to school, right? Everybody stay home, nobody do anything. And, which was idiotic. But at any rate, we end up with a situation where you had so much oil supply, oil prices went negative. I mean, how can prices be negative? If you had a truck and you went to where they had oil, they would pay you to take the oil away. And I remember I had friends saying to me, well, wait a minute, oil's negative. They'll pay you to take it. I'm like, yeah, if you go pick it up, they'll pay you to take it. And they said to me, why don't you buy oil then? I said, because where am I going to store it, on my front lawn? Right? Like, I guarantee you the town of Westport, Connecticut has rules about storing industrial quantities of oil on
Oh,
your
yeah.
front lawn. You need somewhere to put it. You actually have to go pick it up. It's a thing. And
What?
so, this is we were just talking about this a week ago.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we were joking about how do we line the pool, a pool to handle additional oil and just start pumping it into it. And I always think about the Always Sunny in Philadelphia when they're trying to be oil men by reselling gasoline. And I just think about the absurdity of people not understanding the different types of contracts. Because to Gary's point, there's 2 types. There's the financial instrument, which is Brent, where you're not really going to take delivery, and there's WTI, which you're taking delivery. And if you aren't very astute about when your expiry is coming up, you then have 3 days to sell after expiry and what's called the gray market. And as somebody who had participated in a lot of these different things, because I did trade physical as well, I would look to pick those people off because the only person you can sell to is me. And I'm not going to pay you top dollar at what that expiry is because I
Yeah.
know you sitting somewhere, sitting on 5 contracts, not realizing what you just did, have no means of taking delivery of that. So that was always a good day when I could dip my toe into the gray market and alleviate some of those concerns for some people that got stuck wearing some future contracts that they didn't manage very well.
So wait, when you were talking about filling a swimming pool with oil, which
Mhm.
isn't bad, like I mean my pool at home probably fits 20,000, 22,000 gallons. That would be something,
It's
right?
meaningful.
But how long did it take you guys before you started talking about either saran wrap or garbage bags with duct tape? Because
Well,
I know those came up.
that was why I sent everybody the Always Sunny in Philadelphia episode where they had those big blue barrels and they were filling them up with gasoline and trying to sell it door to door at a discount because there was one place that was selling it at a discount and they thought they could capitalize. So they had 3 of those big blue barrels. I'm like, we could do that with oil. I was like, we should do that with oil. There it is. But yeah, not so much.